Hey guys, today we interview Andy McCotter Bicknell, the head of competitive intelligence at ClickUp. He walks us through all the soft and hard skills it takes to go from an associate product marketing manager to a senior product marketing manager, how to break into competitive intelligence, some of the ins and outs of competitive intelligence, and even things like how to get mentorship in a niche field like competitive intelligence. Hope you guys enjoy. All right, Andy, it's great to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, dude.
So first thing, competitive intelligence is something that a lot of people probably don't, come out of school thinking they're going to end up in. So would love to hear about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career in sales and I was doing kind of the typical like SDR, AE type of a thing. But I actually went to school for marketing. And so after about a year and a half of sales, I was like, all right, I got to figure out a way to get into marketing. Pretty much applied anywhere that had open roles in marketing. I wasn't even like specifically like looking into tech. But the one company that really answered my applications was ZoomInfo, luckily enough. And so my wife and I moved from Michigan to Vancouver, Washington, where we still are. And I worked at ZoomInfo as an associate product marketing manager. And so, I was one of two product marketers at ZoomInfo in the beginning. Did everything that you can imagine product marketers do that relate to like product launch, enablement, competitive intel. And slowly over time, I just got more ingrained in the competitive intel side as ZoomInfo began to grow. And so I just kind of stuck with that even after ZoomInfo, now that I'm at ClickUp, and that's kind of where I'm at today.
Diving into your stint at ZoomInfo, you moved from an associate product marketing manager all the way up to a senior product marketing manager in 3 years. In product marketing, what do you think are the essential skills to move up the ladder? Ideally give me a mix of some soft and maybe some hard skills that help.
I think that, and this is so some of these are going to seem really simple, but then like we'll just try to put them into the context of a product marketer, right? So communication, right? In the very beginning, you don't know like what you should be telling people, like what people don't know, what people already know. And so I think in a lot of cases, the product marketers, they might tend to just like shy away and just like assume that people already know like what's happening. But the reality is there's really no such thing as over communication as a product marketer, especially if you're working at like a company that's shipping a lot of products really quickly and in quick succession. So at ZoomInfo and ClickUp, like we're just always shipping new products. Plans are always changing. And so that was something that I really tried to get a grip on pretty quickly. Like just, okay, something has changed over here. I need to make sure that my manager knows. I need to make sure that these other impacted teams know. And then also taking things a step further and be like, okay, now what kind of impact does it have? Like, how does it change the other plans that we had in place? And so being able to not just like relay information, but then also saying like, as a result of these plans changing, here's what we might need to do next. That's one thing. The other thing is, being able to like work on your own without feeling like you need to like constantly ask your manager for feedback. Don't like, don't get me wrong. I think that there's like some things where like, just depending on the importance of the launch, you want to make sure that you have eyes on your work and get other people's opinions. But over time, you'll find that the more you're able to just kind of do things yourself, the more like quickly you'll be able to move up because people will just trust you that you've got it. And so I try to put myself into that position relatively quickly. And then the last thing I think is important is going from associate PMM to regular PMM. It was just about doing like all of the general kind of PMM stuff really well, just kind of being like standardizing myself. But then going from PMM to senior PMM, that was like when I started to double down and specialize in a specific area. And for me, that was competitive intel. And so I think there's something to be said there. I don't know if that always has to be the path for everyone, but becoming like the guy at ZoomInfo for competitive intel, I think that helped kind of the transition between like PMM into senior PMM.
Your last role as a senior PMM at ZoomInfo in competitive intelligence. What was the business need? How come, they moved you into this role and what made you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so I mean ZoomInfo, even today, but back then too, like it was a big market. There's tons of competitors, and ZoomInfo was definitely the category leader. And so there was just a really big need to make sure that we had somebody that was in the role that was able to keep an eye on everything that was happening and be able to say like, oh, okay, like there's kind of similar to a regular kind of PMM role, like internally, like when something happens, like what are the implications of this change? That's what you got to do as a competitive intel manager. Like what are the implications of a competitor launching a specific product, acquiring another competitor? What are the implications of a pricing change, or when we start hearing more of a competitor being mentioned by customers in sales calls? All of those things also, you gotta try to tackle them from a competitive perspective. And we were just seeing a lot of that in Zoom Info, especially, right? Because again, as a market leader, like a bunch of other smaller companies are trying to take your customers away from you. And so luckily our CEO and our C-suite, they were very much in favor of, making sure that we were on top of who all of our competitors were, what their specialties were, their strengths and their weaknesses. And I think that's the most important thing, is just that, like, from a leadership perspective, that's understood that, competitive is an important function. I don't think I would have gotten into the role if, like our CEO wasn't like responding to like my competitor newsletters, or like asking competitive questions. And so I think that that's definitely like an important piece if you're trying to get into that kind of a role.
A little bit of a hot take here. Lots of LinkedIn influencers say things like you shouldn't listen to your competitors and you should only listen to customers. How would you respond to that? What's the importance of a formal competitive intelligence program?
And this is a great question. I mean, I see the screenshots of, what is it, Jeff Bezos, like all of his like interviews, like spliced together, like saying only listen to your customers. I get it. The thing is, paying attention to competitors is paying attention to your customers. My friend Alex McDonald, he does CI over at Airtable. He has a really great quote that I lean on all the time, where it's, you want to be customer obsessed, but competitor aware. I think that's how he says it. You should always be aware of your competitive landscape and understanding like what your customers are interested in from a competitive perspective. That's understanding your customers better at the end of the day. Like it's understanding their pain points, understanding like the workflows that they would prefer. And so I I get that like in our heads it's kind of like this dueling thing, like competitors over here, customers over here. But at the end of the day, I see competitive intel as like one input into understanding the whole of your customer. If you don't have that, then you unfortunately don't understand your customer as well as you should if you're going to market with something. So that's usually how I try to think about it. It's never really, to your point though, it's not helping anybody if you're just trying to like beat a competitor for the sake of beating a competitor. There always has to be like some kind of like focus on the customer at the end of it, and some kind of need to better understand them.
So getting into, competitive intelligence 101, for most companies, competitive intelligence is your customer puts out a news article or changes something in their website, or they hear something in a sales demo and they just send it into a Slack channel and everybody bashes the competitor or does whatever they do. Would love if you could quickly walk me through what competitive intel keeps an eye on and how you formalize those reportings in the company. And you had also said at Zoom Info there was something about a competitor newsletter, so maybe it's cool to even sprinkle that in.
So I think there's a couple of good places to start. Like if you're just putting together a competitive program, it's important to keep track of, your competitors' pricing, some of like their landing pages for like use cases and products. Like help articles are usually like where that you'll find some good product information. And then, naturally like PR, news alerts, those kinds of things are really important. Separate from that, what I always like start off on, what I'll start off with is I'll add in employee growth stats. And so if you sign up for LinkedIn Premium, then you'll be able to see from a company perspective on a company profile or account. If you click the Insights tab, you'll see kind of like this chart that shows you how much a company is growing from an employee perspective. And for a lot of privately held companies, there's a great proxy to just see like the health of the company. If they're a smaller company, if they're adding like 15, 20 people per month on average over the past year, like that's pretty solid, like especially in this economy. If, it's the opposite and they're trending down, then, oh, they might be in trouble. It can just give you kind of a good like gut check of your competitors. That's one. And then for sales, like if you can put together competitor trackers in your call recording tools, it can just give you a sense of like, okay, how often are specific competitors being mentioned by customers or prospects in sales calls. So that's usually like what I would try to put into a newsletter. And I would try to expand or summarize on any trends that I'm seeing and the implications of any like new product launches or changes, like I said, in the market, just try to like do the old like AI summarization type of a thing where it's like, okay, like give me like 3 bullet points. Like what are the key points here, like behind why this is important for the company to know. That's pretty much the newsletter in a nutshell. When it comes to like paying attention to specific areas though, like you have to really be careful and try to figure out who it is that you're trying to serve, right? So like for sales, like they really don't care if like a competitor just adds a tiny little feature. Like they really don't care. I promise you. However, product managers, and especially if they're the product manager of that feature or that feature area, then yeah, they're definitely going to care. They're going to want to see like why would they add that? Like does it change things much? And so you just have to, just like in any other kind of like area of marketing, who's your audience and what is the thing that they're interested in? And so I would definitely recommend that you speak with whoever it is that you're trying to send this newsletter to and just be like, hey, like what is it that you are interested in specifically? And maybe throw out a couple of different ideas for them to think about. And same thing with, your CEO and your C-suite. If you have access to them, just try to figure out like the things that they're naturally thinking about. Try to understand. I'm sure like everybody has some kind of company goals that they're able to access and kind of keep in mind. And so if you're able to see or detect any competitive changes that might have implications on your company's goals, that's definitely something that your CEO would care about. And so just try to keep all of those things in mind as you're digging, because there's tons of different examples of things that you could be tracking. But if you're just one person, then you got to be a bit more strategic and pick the right things that you think are going to make an impact.
Love that. That's an awesome answer. And how do you get mentorship in a competitive intelligence role? It's not a role that you see maybe 100,000 of, like a marketing manager, marketing director. So yeah, are you primarily, connecting with other product marketers or finding people in your exact role to speak to when it comes to mentorship?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that it's really important to see and spend time with and interact with other competitive intel managers, product marketers to kind of understand and just like create community. Quick plug for Healthy Competition. That's the community that I run for CI and PMMs.
Yep.
And that's all great. I love that piece of it. The other kind of like hidden gem for CI though, and I don't know if this is necessarily like for quote unquote mentorship. This is more just for like going a little bit off the beaten path, is I've just found that, a ton of founders out there have come up with kind of like their own workflows for understanding the competition. Some of them ethical, others not so ethical. And so in either case, what I've found and what I've really enjoyed doing with my podcast is speaking with founders and just like learning like, hey, okay, cool. Like here's your business, here's your product, you're in this category. Like, how do you think about the competition? How have you like put together your strategy? Like category design, all of those kind of pieces are like what I tackle in my podcast. And usually like for every few founders that I talk with, they'll share like a couple of different ways for how they were able to get some kind of specific information about the market. And it's always like they're always different from like what a product marketer would do. Like you see blogs that are like, oh, the 10 best ways to approach competitive intel, like a blog from like HubSpot or something on Google. Those are great, but I've always found that those kind of funny, not so often talked about workflows, they're usually from like a founder, someone who's actually like not in like a formal competitive intel role. And so I guess if there's like a call to action here for this one, it's like, yeah, definitely like if you're looking for like a true career in competitive intel and to be a better CI person and to like formalize that role within your org, definitely talk to like a product marketer or a CI person. If you're looking to just kind of like flex a little bit and find some other like workflows that, other people might not know about, I think that founders and people who like have made this like their livelihood, their product succeeding, they've found some interesting and unique ways of finding intel. And so definitely reach out to some if you have access or again, talking to your founder or like the CEO that you work for. and tried to figure out like, hey, like how did you do this? However long ago. That'd be one other recommendation.
Cool. Cool. Love that. That's awesome. So yeah, you mentioned healthy competition, community run, and a podcast. Yeah, want to just tell me a bit more about it? Who kind of hangs out here, and what things do you guys talk about?
Yeah, so it's product marketers and competitive intel folks mostly. And I mean, what do we talk about? I mean, there's nothing that's really like off limits exactly, but the best way that I like to describe it is like the safe space for product marketers and CI folks who can ask questions that they might be like afraid to ask within their company and just kind of get like a gut check like from other folks who have been there and that like want to support them, but also to just like talk about things that are happening in the space. And so, for example, I saw this blog that somebody from Zoom, like Zoom web conferencing, like we're on a Zoom right now. Someone from Zoom posted a blog that was talking about Zoom's new like call recorder tool. It was like Zoom IQ versus Gong. It was like the traditional, conversation intelligence vendor, probably the most popular, well known. And it was just like this big blog, and it was like, oh wow, like Zoom's competing against Gong in this area. And so I just like reposted the blog into the community. It was like, oh, like wow, like what are your thoughts on this? And it was really cool seeing, we got like upwards of like more than a dozen different responses from different CI and PMM folks. And they're just giving their opinion on like, oh, this is a good move for XYZ. Oh, this if they are going to continue doing this, like they need to watch out for like ABC. And it was just kind of cool seeing kind of like this melting pot of different opinions on if this was an interesting or if this is a good move for Zoom, like what this means for Gong. So things like that are also interesting to hear from the community about. And then, I think the other thing too with CI and PMM, it's still such a relatively new profession, and it's going through a lot of change, I think, with every single year. And so it's really good to just kind of have a group of folks that you feel comfortable around, that knowing that like you can that you can like ask any questions or share different things that are working, and you know that other people are going to like appreciate it and respond, actually, not just like throw something into the void and not get any kind of response. And so I definitely take pride in that there's like a good amount of engagement and camaraderie in there. We're not the biggest community by any means. I'm not trying to like make this like thousands and thousands of members or anything. I'm really just trying to make this like uh, like I said, like a safe space where you can go to like actually meet somebody that could actually help you in your role, as opposed to just like, here's a question, here's a quick response, boom, done.
So, on to the last question here. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to get into a career that is competitive intelligence?
Hmm. I would start small first, like just kind of do it on your own within the company that you're working with. You might already have a CI person and just see if like you might be able to help and like be kind of like their, I mean, for CI folks, like they're usually a small team anyway. And so any help you can offer, like they'll definitely take it, whether you're in sales, product, they need these kind of like liaisons between different teams. And so if you want to volunteer yourself, that's a great in to just kind of understand what it is that person is looking for. But separately, like if you're a product marketer, you can just take the onus and start doing competitive intel work. Like you don't have to like ask for permission to start posting competitive updates or like again implications of, oh, like competitors doing this. This has an impact on these projects that we're working on. When I first started at Zoom Info, the competitor newsletter that I did, like in addition to like the regular like PMM stuff, it was like literally just the employee growth that I would send to our CEO and like two other folks in the C-suite. Just every month, that was what I would send. And then just gradually over time, I added a little bit more because I was like, oh, okay, this is like my window of opportunity. Like how much FaceTime do you get like as an associate PMM with the CEO of a company? So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make this newsletter stick. I'm just gonna like add a bunch of stuff to it. I want this to be really helpful. And it took like years before like it became like this like well-known thing throughout the company that I would send. But over time, it was like, okay, cool. Like it became a bigger part of my role, and I also really like doing it. And so it was a great kind of way to transition from being just like generalized PMM to specialized for competitive intel. And so that's the other way that I'd recommend going about it.
Well, Andy, it's been awesome having you on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.